This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word.
Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Timothy Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum. This is a series for lovers of the Word made flesh. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and I'm Lee Bortons. And today we have joining us not so often regular guest, Sherry Castillo. She's Classical Conversations Multimedia's Chief Operating Officer, longtime homeschooler, and just mother extraordinaire. So we welcome her to the show. Jennifer, why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about today and actually this whole month?
Yeah, so we've been working our way through the resources that help cultivate Christian leaders. And so last time, if you missed it, I can't say we because I wasn't on there, but some of the team discussed the pattern of God's truth. And this week, we're going to talk about Practicing Affirmation by Sam Crabtree. I just noticed today, by the way, that he has a book called Practicing Thankfulness, which might be good for Thanksgiving. I haven't read it, so I don't know. And then we'll take a Thanksgiving break and we'll do the Soul of Science.
So is the Soul of Science going to be next week or the week after
It's
Thanksgiving?
next week, isn't it, Tim? Yeah, and then Thanksgiving break. I did it backwards. Sorry.
Good. Yeah, and one of the reasons we introduce or I should say review what's going on this month is just to help our listeners get a look ahead as to what's coming, as well as remind them the things that have been more recently uploaded and are available to listen to. So you can access all of our past episodes on my channel at YouTube. It's at Lee Bortons, or you can visit my website, leebortons.com, where we have a calendar and the books purchased are linked to classicalconversationbooks.com, our sponsor, in case you would like to buy any before going through the discussion that we have. I also hope that our discussion sometimes has encouraged you to go buy the book. And then, of course, we know that as homeschooling parents, we're always looking for better ways to speak with our children. So all the books we suggest are going to help you in your homeschooling journey. So let's go, Jennifer.
All right. So, I'm going to ask you, why did we choose this book, Practicing Affirmation?
Yeah, if you actually look at all of our cultivating leadership books that we've gone over this month, and we've done some even previously in the last 2 years, when I was looking at this one, I was thinking, I think a lot of them were picked because it's where I'm weak. And I figured if I'm no good at doing something, there's probably other people who could use some help. So this one, Practicing Affirmation, think about our listening book and our Peacemakers book. It's really easy to just, say what you want and walk away from people. And one of the reasons I'm so glad Sherry's on the show and that it's actually part of our leadership curriculum. Sherry's very good. You can see it in her face. She stops before she speaks, and she's always trying to find a nice way of saying things. Versus I need to keep reading the book and practicing over and over again. So it's there because, as children, as we raise our children, it's really easy to say to them, just shut up and sit down, or do it because I said so, right? We get frustrated and tired. And that's never fruitful or helpful. And then, of course, as Christians who believe in God and that, we want our children to see us modeling the way He is, this book's really good at pointing out over and over again that God inhabits the praise of His people. And if He lives in our praises, isn't that what we want to pass on to our brothers and sisters as well as our children?
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, as I was thinking about it today, and you've done a really good job of connecting it to our children, I was thinking so often in homeschooling, I was about the to-do list. Let's get this done. And then I would praise their efforts, but not to them. I would do it to other people when I was talking about, oh, we had a really good homeschool day and one of them did this. And so it's good to remember to affirm their efforts as we go and not just be checking off the list.
One of my sons objected and he said, Mom, you make me feel like a dog. And I'm like, what? What do you mean I make you feel like a dog? He said, you're always just saying good boy. Like, that's not helpful. Tell me what I did well at. So our children can be that very mirror of affirmation that we need to improve.
Yeah, That's a good point. That's why we don't allow our students, they're assessing their work. We don't allow them to say, I did a good job.
Mhm.
And they need to say why. So I like that.
Mhm.
Well, this idea of affirming, especially affirming children, it's in a lot of conversations. The world has really latched on to the idea of it. So Tim, talk about what the perspective of the book on practicing affirmation and how that's different from maybe how the world conceives of the concept of practicing affirmation.
Yeah, it's really important to distinguish because, we live in a world of all kinds of things that you're asked to affirm that sometimes aren't worthy of being affirmed. Um, Sam Crabtree does a really nice job of pointing out that what we're called to affirm is the things that God affirms. That when people are living out what God has intended for them, then we should affirm those things in them, but that we're not called to affirm things that are bad, that go against God's design or against God's purposes or against God's nature or the way that He's made people. Um, we uh, we've talked about this over the last several book discussions that one of the things that we tend to do is make either ourselves God in our own eyes or make other things God instead of God. Like when we talked about when people are big, but God is small. We've made people's opinions, whether for good or for a good opinion or bad opinion, more important than God's opinion. And the world we live in, we're either told that we have to affirm what the culture around us affirms, uh, despite what God says, or we have to, we're told that it is imperative that we affirm what people want to be affirmed about. So if I feel like you need to affirm me in my like of seafood or my dislike of seafood, then the world would say you need to affirm that, whether it's worth affirming or not. So again, Sam does a good job of emphasizing affirmation as a practice, but still limiting it to affirming the things that are worthy of affirmation.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that because I think one of the things we try to practice when we're assessing our children or students in challenge, or they're assessing themselves or each other, is it should be honest assessment. You shouldn't affirm things that weren't praiseworthy.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's tricky to learn.
When we're helping other people's children, sometimes we don't really know what we should and shouldn't affirm. And as tutors, that can sometimes lead to some trouble. I think of a time when this young person just did an amazing graphical presentation right when computers were just beginning to be around, and that she had that technological skill before the other students. And she went home, and after all my affirmation, and her mom called me that night, and she was a good friend. There was no animosity in any of this, and said to me, my daughter realized that how easy it is to fool the world into thinking you're better than you are, because she knew the machine had done the work and not her, and she could see what the other students had done and the work they had put into it. And all I saw was the pretty graphics that I'd never seen before from a kid. Right. So technology can make things difficult for us also.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
Mhm.
just technology. I mean, students who do well at debate in the sense that they're going after the win, they're striving hard, but maybe they're doing it with a very ungracious spirit,
Mhm.
or mean-spiritedly. We can find ways to affirm the good hard work that they've done, but not necessarily to affirm everything about the way that they've acted in the debate.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this here before too, but I think it's a conversation I've had a couple times with Andrew Kern, that it can also be, and this is really tricky, I think, as it's practicing affirmation doesn't mean affirming your kids' natural abilities all the time. So if something comes very naturally to them or is easy and they haven't worked hard, that's a different thing than practicing affirmation with them because they conquered something that was actually really difficult that they had to work hard to overcome. Or that they have this talent, but they're not maybe using it. And this is us too. I don't mean just the children, but not using it to serve the body. So anyway.
Well, when we have cultural episodes, we just are hopefully coming out of one. I'm going to pray against it remaining, but where, bodily mutilation is
Mhm.
affirmed for
Mhm.
fear that the person will commit suicide or do something even worse. And so sometimes things are so not so trite where we affirm too much, but so awful that we shouldn't even affirm it at all. But we're not practiced at figuring out how to affirm that person as an image bearer, but not affirm necessarily the action. Like that's difficult sometimes to do.
Well, I found this book very helpful in a pivotal time with my kids in knowing how to do that affirmation where you brought forward what you saw them doing that glorified God. And so it wasn't praising them for their behavior other than their behavior bringing glory to the Lord. And that brought a different perspective for me to look at as I affirm. So that would keep from that hubris idea, that pride idea, because we hesitate sometimes to praise people because we think, oh, we're just going to cause them to be proud. But it gave the right praise, like you were saying, Jennifer, that honest praise, but not about them, but about what skills or gifts the Lord has given them and how they're using it beneficially to love others, not just improve themselves. So that's why I really appreciated this book.
Yeah, that's good. I'll tell you, I still treasure with one of mine, that her tutor came to me and so I think she was in challenge 2 anyway, and just said, one of the things that I have really appreciated this year is watching her and her best friend and how they truly want the best for each other and they support each other and they help each other with their work and affirm each other. And she said that's a rare kind of friendship. And I thought, wow, I'm sitting here thinking about, did we get all our work done this year? But that was actually way more important. So yeah. So I appreciate what you said, Sherry, too, because I think that'll lead us into our next question. We're talking a lot about how hard this is to do practicing affirmation correctly. And in classical conversations, we're all about having in-person communities meeting together weekly and in-person communities, no matter where they are, if they're classical conversations or church or even your family, those in-person communities are going to lead to conflict and therefore a need for conflict resolution. So how do you see this as being connected to conflict resolution, Sherry?
That's a really interesting question. I think one of the things in relationships and when there is conflict, you got to look at how much you've deposited before you can withdraw. And if you're really focusing on practicing affirmation, it's implying that you are pursuing that with other people, that you're looking at them as an image bearer, you're looking for God in them, you're looking to appreciate God in them. And so you're depositing that in them. So when there's a time of conflict or frustration, you're viewing them rightly, and you're looking to assume the best about them, but also you may have that margin of ability to have a difficult discussion with them where you can withdraw a little bit if you've deposited enough. I think that's where we get into trouble when we haven't affirmed people enough or developed that relationship enough to be able to have that harder conversation that sometimes just living in community takes, but also looking at the truth and love when we have those conversations.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. All right. Well, Lee, I'm going to kick it over to you now. So how does affirmation work when you're a parent and you're speaking to a child who needs correction or critique of some kind? What does that have to do with practicing affirmation?
One of the things I found hardest was recognizing my child's true nature and their abilities. In other words, one of my mentors said that we look at children as though they have like a bigger head than they really do. That they're not small adults. They are still just children. And so finding some sort of balance between overestimating their experience and yet underestimating their ability. And so just having the right expectations, because I can remember sometimes when after this book came out and I got to know people like yourselves and had good mentors, instead of getting mad at my children, I would stop myself by saying things like, I wish you could be 40 years old right now. Like I would say to myself the dumb thing I'm thinking out loud so that I would calm down and remember who this is in front of me. Then that would help me be able to correct or critique them more appropriately.
Yeah, I like that. And one thing we've really practiced in I just see this as going so hand in hand with both conflict resolution and assessment. But one thing we've really practiced is that appropriateness. So a lot of times, back to your story about assessing a student and not having maybe all that you needed to do that, I think that's one good reason that we have begun to practice having them assess themselves first. Because a lot of times you can piggyback off of whatever the student is thinking about. So if they say, oh, I really should have outlined this paper before I started writing, then your assessment can practice, affirming them for that recognition and giving them some direction to go. So
it's not just knowing their nature and who they are at the moment you're talking to them, but also the classical model should help us too. Are they struggling with the grammar? Like they still don't even have the words. Or are they struggling with, they have the words, they've actually been working at it, but they don't have the maturity yet to get the idea out in a way that we can understand. And so that can also, so identifying where they're struggling before we respond can help us to criticize or correct what they really need help on, rather than feeling like, okay, you just can't do it, you're no good at this.
And also having that right expectation. I think that's what's helped me with classical education too. I'll give you an example. When I started helping my children learn how to write, I didn't have the skill set to know what to expect out of my children when they were younger learning how to write. And it was the easy plus one idea that helped me to rightly assess them then, because my expectations were too great for their, like you said, Lee, I was looking at them too old to expect them to do too many things and assessing them incorrectly. So that didn't affirm them. That just discouraged them. And so setting up those expectations early on, or knowing what to assess, helps with affirming them.
So the Lord gives us our community of our family, and now our community of CC, and then our community of experts like the person who wrote this book. There are places we can go for help.
Makes me think a little bit of the divisio in a classical essay, a classical oration address. Right up front, we divide out what are the things that we agree on before we start to disagree. And I think that's really a helpful idea. It's helpful when you're approaching someone to convince them of something. Obviously, that's what that persuasive form is for. But even as we go to other people, our children or someone who we conflict with, is to start with affirming the things that we both agree that are good. You know, if Sherry was going to her kid and they didn't do well with the new thing, she could still say, you did a great job with the things that we've already practiced on the last assignment. You did such a good job of applying all the things that we've learned. But let's go back and look at the things that need some work that we still need to work on or improve on. And that can give that foundation for them to be accepting of a critique that otherwise they might just throw their hands up and say, oh, well, I'm just no good at writing, and run off to the room and cry.
That story reminds me of the first 3 weeks of CC in its very beginning existence. So the first week I assigned everybody a book report, and they came back with some things written, but no book reports. So then we got to go over more, okay, well, what really was a book report and what was the expectation? So the next week they were given a character sketch. Well, they all came with a book report because now they knew what that was. And we forget that as children, they don't know what we know. We have to give them that time, but we have to also recognize they eventually, come Christmas that first year, they all of a sudden began to start writing what I asked for. But they had to get to know me, the expectations, their skill set. So there's so many different things that you can affirm when maybe the outcome isn't quite what you expected from them, just in the attempt of what they do. And like Jennifer's so good at reminding us, essay means just to try.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one thing. So I learned from our friend Amanda Butler, and it has to do with that idea of to try, is that when she is giving assessment, she doesn't say but in the middle. She'll say, I really liked your exordium, and I need you to work on having a clear conclusion. And I really have tried to practice her habit, because there's something, I think she's right, that if you say but, you kind of negated your praise. But also it goes with that idea of essay. Everything we're doing is trying more, just like you described with your students kind of getting it by December. So if you say and, it's very clear that this is an ongoing process.
Mhm.
And we're going to say and again next time. We're going to say and again next time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, well, we probably need to take our break.
Okay, so it's time to thank our sponsor, classicalconversationsbooks.com, where the books discussed each week can be purchased. We have the entire 2023 Words Aptly Spoken calendar at leebortons.com, as well as the 2024 calendar, and soon to have links to the 2025 calendar. So thank you, gang, for hanging in with me for so long. I think we've all enjoyed these discussions, and I hope that next week when we discuss the Soul of Science, people will be as blessed as we've been. Soul of Science is a long time CC book, right? From 1997, we've been working with that. And so I'm excited about our discussion there. All right, so Jennifer, what's next?
Yeah, well, we're going to do what we always do and do a little bit of close reading of some of the passages. And in this case, we actually have the author's purpose statement, which is nice that they tell you what is the intent, where we're going. I always appreciate that. So Sherry, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. And the title of this section is What's the Point? Good affirmations are God-centered, pointing to the image of God in a person. The only commendable attributes in people were given to them. Everything is from God, through God, and to God, so that in all things, including the commendable qualities in people, he might get the glory. Who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. That's from Romans 11:35 through 36. I remember being dismayed at the well-intended remarks of a seminary official at a large convocation who was about to thank a number of persons for their efforts. His intention and spirit were good, but he prefaced his thank yous by saying, the Apostle Paul was always thanking people. Well, no, the Apostle Paul wasn't. You will not find Paul doing such a thing in scriptures. He didn't thank people for things. He thanked people for people. Paul's practice is, I thank God for you. Yes, the person is refreshed by the expression of gratitude, but God gets the glory. We are wise to give God-centered thank yous and God-centered affirmations.
I love that. One of the years that I did this the best with challenge students is that they were kind of, they came from different communities for one thing, and so they didn't quite know each other yet. But then there was a little bit of that spirit of jealousy for other people's gifts creeping in, as you will also see sometimes in Paul's letters. Since we're here on Paul, I think that's what reminded me of it. And so that year, at the beginning of the day, I read to them the opening of one of Paul's letters, and at the end of the day, to send them out the door, I read the closing. And so I think this is again why it was on my mind. And finally, one day, I just stopped them and I said, you guys, you all have been given gifts, and therefore you make a body. And I need you to think about the contribution that each of you is making to the body. And by the end of the year, when they were on a panel at a practicum, they were affirming each other in that way. And that was really precious for me to hear them do. It took them the whole year. Going back to your example about book reports to Decemberly, it took them a whole year of figuring out how to do that, how to actually acknowledge someone else and their place in the body. But when they did, it was a beautiful lesson.
Yes, Lewis just reminds us so many times that if we're truly the body of Christ, when somebody else does something well, I did it well too.
Mm-hmm.
I think this also takes some of the awkwardness out of some of the times that you receive a compliment when someone says something to you and you kind of don't know what to say when you're like, thank you, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can affirm you in this way, and we can learn from that in affirming others, that if they say something like, when you were doing that, I really saw Jesus at work in you, then it's really easy for us to say, yeah, praise God that he would make use of me, or that you could see that in what was happening. That's a way easier thing than to say, thank you, and really it's not something that you should be thanking me for at all because it was God at work.
You think we'd be comfortable changing thank you to I thank God for you? Like just making that a habit instead of when our kids are little saying, say please, say thank you, to maybe say, I thank God for you. Train them right from the beginning.
Well, I was thinking that too, Lee, with that idea of practicing affirmation. It's
Mm.
renewing your mind on who God is in you and who God is in them. And I think that practicing affirmations keeps us from pride, because we're looking for God in other people. So we think of ourselves rightly in line of others, and seeing God in us, and seeing ourselves rightly in line with God and who he is in us.
But I think about all the non-believers I say thank you to over the course of the week, because I say thank you a lot. I don't say please often enough, but I say thank you a whole lot. And if I was saying to them and said, I thank God for you,
Mm.
who knows who might ask me about him?
Mm.
Yeah, quite a blessing.
Recognizing whose they really are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. Well, as we go on to our next passage, so I think we've done a pretty good job of talking and not allowing ourselves so far in the conversation to think of affirmation as a fake happy face to cover over problems, or not allowing conversations that lead to needed improvement. And so, Tim, do you want to read what Crabtree says about affirming properly?
Yeah, this is a section called The Importance of Proportionality. Generally, it is easy to affirm early in a relationship because no offenses have been committed yet. But over the course of time, we can experience a growing desire to bring certain corrections to the table. Which will dominate, affirmation or correction? Proportionality matters when it comes to affirmation, for affirmation can be choked out by criticism, correction, or mere indifference or neglect. How much affirmation is enough? There is no magic number. Picture a horizontal line representing a continuum from a healthy diet of affirmation on one end to an insufficient quantity on the other. The aim is not to find the precise point on the line that is justifiable, but to unmistakably, in the eyes of many people around us, move toward the right. Robust proportionality between affirmation and correction may vary from relationship to relationship, and may even vary from season to season within the same relationship. Sometimes women send signals that they desire a little more refreshment during seasons such as pregnancy or mothering young children. Sometimes men take criticism more severely when they are running late or feel they're being made to run late by someone else. The point is not to calculate some once and for all ratio, but to act refreshing, to be actively refreshing.
Hard to step in other people's shoes.
Do what? Say it again.
It's really hard to step in other people's shoes and know what they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe a good takeaway from that, Lee, would be maybe we should always err a little on the side of affirming.
Mm-hmm.
If it is too much, rather than missing a chance to be kind. Yeah. You know, it's like in texting's made that such a difficult thing. I just yesterday I texted a dear friend something and she texted back to me and I thought, what in the world is she talking about? And so I just replied really quickly to her. And then we cross text, you know how you think you responded to one, but two come through and then you don't know which one they're responding to. And I was just like, get on the phone. Right, we got to get on the phone. And, and then of course she was at the dentist's office or something and couldn't answer. And so I texted her and I said, if I've offended you, I am sorry. Let's make sure we talk today. Right. And and then she texted back and we were overly affirmative in our text because we had just been overly negative in our text. And so our final conclusion was, of course, don't text big ideas.
Yeah.
Or just hard things, right?
Yeah.
Um, maybe to, like, I know for me as a homeschooling dad, when my kids come to me with things that they are working on and need to show me, um, if I'm trying to cram it in, I've got 5 minutes between this meeting and the next meeting. Let's look at that. And I see things that need to be worked on. And so that's where I go first, is always the red pen. This is wrong. This needs fixed. Do more of that. And maybe rushing into it is just as bad, to not take the time to think where's the right starting spot to say all of this is good. It's just these couple things.
Yeah, I think it goes back to investing before you withdraw. And if we're always thinking of that, because I want to withdraw first before I invest, or what you were saying, Tim, about Divisio, where you say these are where we agree, and this is the only place we don't agree. And just before we come in, and I don't agree with you. Creating that. Yeah, it's creating that relationship, nurturing that relationship, is part of that affirmation and that practicing affirmation and seeing it that way.
Yeah, and just like you said, that I think that was you, Tim, that maybe it was you, Lee. We don't know what everyone's experience is or what they're going through. And so when we're rushing in resolving a conflict, we're probably going to assume that the way we perceived the situation is the accurate perception of the situation, which is almost never true. And so just trying to find out what's underlying it. I mean, I had a situation recently where I thought that a student had been really disrespectful. Well, come to find out, it was just this season of fear. And the reaction was out of that fear. And so you just have to be careful and ask questions and people are worth taking the time to find out what the circumstances are so that you can get to the point of practicing affirmation or practicing correction, whatever's needed, or both. Okay. Well, Lee, I'm going to have you read to us next, but later in the book, Crabtree addresses some mistakes and challenges to implementing affirmation. So I don't think we've made it sound easy, but in case we did, we're about to disabuse that notion. He helps us in this section to make sure that we don't let affirmation take a place that it doesn't deserve. So Lee, do you want to read this one for us?
It's titled Mistake. Thinking affirmation is the chief thing. As important as affirmation is, and even though you're reading a whole book on the subject, affirmation is not the main thing or the only thing in human relationships. Affirmation is a factor, not the only factor in refreshing reciprocal relationships. For example, our prayers for an individual might be infinitely more important for him than our affirmations. In fact, we might never meet the person or give him one single affirmation. I have people on my prayer list I have never met. If I never affirm them in this life, my prayers could still turn out to be crucial for them. Christ is the main thing. And if I never affirm a person but leave him with Christ, I have done the infinitely more important thing. Meanwhile, not being the main thing does not make an affirmation unimportant.
I just keep thinking the whole time we've been talking, and especially here again in this passage, it requires such wisdom and discernment for me to know when is it for me to speak to this person, or when do I need to pray for this person, or when is it both? They're just, I have a tendency to charge in and want to solve things. And so one of the things I've had to learn over the years is that sometimes my role in this situation is prayer, that's not my particular problem to solve.
I mean, the scriptures seem pretty clear that if we know we're the cause of the problem, we need to go say, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
But if we are detached from it, or, not in the cause and effect, but know about it, then maybe you need to go slower.
Yeah.
I like the phrase he had in there, a refreshing reciprocal relationship. If that's what you're pursuing, a refreshing relationship that people are refreshed in the relationship with you. I think, and you go to the Lord and ask him to help you see how to be a refreshment, living water, and
Mhm.
for that person, it will help in that pursuit and seeing your relationships that way. Because some relationships we don't pursue as refreshing reciprocal relationships. And I think that's where we have to be careful if our thoughts aren't right about that relationship.
Mhm.
And sometimes there are there are relationships that we've had that have been so broken that the person isn't even open to hearing affirmation, let alone critique from us, and taking that person to Christ and asking him to affirm them in faith or in forgiveness of maybe of us, um, is the only avenue that we have.
Yeah, because particularly in that case that you described, that person is not going to receive our affirmation as being genuine
Right.
or timely or appropriate. Mm.
Want a refreshing reciprocal relationship. They may already have plenty of them, or they may not be really traveling in your sphere. And so you might try to reach out to them and not get any response back that was a kind thing or a pleasant thing for them.
Mhm.
And so then okay, this is someone I probably just should pray for when the Lord prompts me, but they're not going to be coming over for dinner.
Mhm.
Mm. I like that word refreshing. I'm going to be thinking about that
Yeah.
because even this, oh, go ahead, Sherry.
No, you're right, Jennifer. I think it can look different depending on the actual relationship you have and what that refreshment would be. It can be just me praying for them because my affirmation wouldn't be refreshing for them.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, sometimes just speaking affirmation out loud is really refreshing. This is a silly thing, but I was trying to help my husband set up a webinar once. And so I was on the phone with a bunch of his coworkers and he said something disparaging about himself. And I just flippantly said, don't say that about my husband. My husband has amazing abilities. And I was just really kind of I was affirming him, but I was also, a little bit teasing him. And it was so countercultural that someone on the call sent me a thank you note and a gift card because she said, I really appreciated the way you affirmed your husband on that call. Too often in our culture, we're bashing our husbands. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad she took time to do that. Not because what I did was amazing, but because it reminded me how important affirmation is and how countercultural it can be to be in those refreshing relationships, that I have been appreciative of her all these years for just calling that to my attention. So
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great. Jennifer, just Proverbs 31, I think that um, the wife who praises her husband is the wife who's praised by her husband, and that's a reciprocal, refreshing relationship that the Bible portrays.
and it's sometimes hard to do because, we talk about different levels of relationships on this call. And sometimes the closer you are with your family, the more, the more easy it is to be critical because you have so much history with which to be critical. So it's good reminders. Were you going to say something, Lee?
I was kind of looking ahead to the next passage and thinking of something. So you want to go there?
Oh yeah, I will read it. So in classical conversations, we have 5 core values that we practice: grace in speech, humility of mind, integrity, humility, and excellence. And that's one way we affirm and shape who we want to be as a company. And so we were going to look at humility for a minute. That was the second one. I said grace and then humility. And there is that potential pitfall anytime we're talking about affirmation that we're going to endanger humility. So I'll read the last one. And this subtitle is, "Isn't it oxymoronic to praise humility?" We, of course, face a paradox here. The most humble person to ever live pointed out his own lowliness and urged others to imitate him in it. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus could say, "I'm really humble. I'm the best at it. Watch me, then imitate my humility. It will mean a yoke for you as it does for me." It's not oxymoronic to claim to have the world's greatest humility if the claim is true. Humility is very realistic, embracing what is. Our own humility so easily becomes contaminated with self-preoccupied pride, and then out goes whatever humility was there in the first place. Almost the moment we glimpse any shred of humility in ourselves, we are thinking not of our excellence in meeting a standard by God's grace, but of our intrinsic worthiness, and that's the death of humility. However, we can humbly spot humility in others, people whose humility is greater than our own, and point it out without ruining their humility, especially if we point it out to persons other than the humble one. Whew. I gotta disentangle all the humilities in that passage.
This last 2 months, I've had the opportunity to twice be with a woman who I just met her, and then after the first meeting with her, I spent like 4 hours talking to her, and the whole time I was like, "This woman is so different." And as I thought about it, I started to realize she has more humility than anybody I've ever met. And then we had another meeting where I talked to her for about an hour and a half. And when we were done, I looked at my husband and I said, "I want to be like her. She has a whole skill set that I have never even like been aware of, let alone tried to attain." And so I was pointing out to somebody else, my husband knows her too now, and he was like, "Yeah, she's different." And so just rejoicing with the Lord that he has people like this on the earth. And she doesn't even know I think this about her.
Maybe you'll get to affirm her.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get to practice that with her.
Well, and that was what was so great about when we were together. It's like we couldn't affirm each other enough, and it was so sincere. And I just realized that she just listened so very well.
Hmm. 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 Are you having thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, and this is one that always is a trap for me when people say things that often they do just intend to be affirming, and even in all the right ways. My heart is so good at taking that and twisting it into things that will tempt me to pride if I
Mm.
let it. Um, and I think that the lesson for me in this book from this passage is that even though that may be a temptation to pride in me, it shouldn't stop me from affirming other people. I can't let that be a hang up or a red or some kind of a red herring, right? That I would use to excuse myself from affirming somebody just because for me it might be a temptation to pride.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good.
It could also be a preventative to pride, because if you're always looking to others to affirm them, then you're showing that you're not worried about yourself, right? You're looking to affirm what you see of the Lord in them, and recognizing that. And so you're less concerned about yourself if you're looking to others and praising what you see of the Lord in them.
Yeah, and I think that last bit goes back to what we read in our first excerpt, and that's maybe part of the curative or the preventive for that
Mm-hmm.
trap is if we're praising Christ in them
Mm-hmm.
rather than praising them, that helps us avoid tempting them into that pride.
Hmm. Hmm. One thing I appreciate that I think is pretty special about the culture of our working teams in CC is that we are pretty quick to give credit to one another. So all the time, just I might say, "Hey, I got this great idea from my friend Amanda Butler. She really taught me how to say, and when I'm assessing, and here's why that's been important in my life." But it's it's done in it's not just that we're affirming each other and what we've learned from one another. It's affirming that we are seeing the ways the Lord is growing us.
Mhm.
So I appreciate how everyone that is around me has helped me learn to do that, to really honor the ways we see the work of the Lord in us.
That's good because that's sanctification, isn't it? That continual pursuit for people to see Christ more and me less. And so recognizing where I see Christ more in a person is beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I can't believe it, but we're out of time, and I think we may have lost Lee. They're working on the Wi-Fi in her neighborhood, so I will close this out today. But I really appreciate you guys being here and discussing this book with me. I really enjoyed our conversation and thinking about how to practice affirmation with our students and our families and our communities and our coworkers. I think it was a great conversation, and I can't wait until we talk about Soul of Science next time. So I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.